Hi there. My name is Anna Klingo, and I'm your host for The Womb Warmer, a podcast for mothers and mothers in waiting to share their stories, from the highs and the lows to the joy and the heartache, and to bring hope, encouragement, and a bit of levity to all you amazing women out there. Later in the show, I'll be joined by a good friend and former colleague, Rachel Schnorr. But first, I have 3 brief topics to touch on. 1, my personal insurance woes, which will lead into 2, we found out the gender of our baby, which will lead into my short Father's Day reflection. First, insurance woes. Hopefully at some point I can get an insurance guru on to address those of us who are in between the corporate world insurance and the Medicaid plan. And in the in-between, I was scammed, which I am mildly ashamed to say because I think that I am a fairly intelligent person who does my due diligence. And here, I missed the boat. I opted out of COBRA for various reasons, part of it being timing, but I did opt into an insurance plan that the agent told me covered maternity. Well, yada, yada. After a lot of discussions with the billing individuals at the hospital and hunting down the appropriate contact, I realized that I was paying $300 a month for a maximum of a $1,500, no, not even a $1,500, an $1,100 reimbursement. So over the course of 12 months, I would pay $3,600 for this insurance plan, and the maximum amount of money I would get for my pregnancy was $1,150, leaving me out approximately $2,450, which was obviously unacceptable, so I dropped the plan. Now, I did put on my problem-solving hat, work with a much more helpful insurance agency, and realized that a life event that qualifies for changing insurances is applying for Medicaid and getting denied. So store that away in case you need it. And 2, the medical insurance industry is one that if anyone wants to go fix, please have at it. Now, for this month, I am uninsured, as it does not kick in until next month, which is an inconvenient period in the pregnancy to be uninsured because we were having our anatomy scan and finding out the gender of our baby. So we get to the hospital and I go to the window, I'm checking in. This is an exciting moment. We get to see our baby developing, get to see their little heartbeat and the blood flowing through. But of course, since I'm self-pay, I need to pay up front. And while I encouraged Vance to sidle to the side, he heard the number. There was some sticker shock there. And what's hilarious is I paid 50% there and then proceeded to get the bill for 100% of the cost, saying that the 50% I already paid is recorded. It's off my credit card, but it has not been applied yet. So I still owe. And I feel like when I look at an insurance bill, or a hospital bill, I'm looking at a car mechanic's bill. And they're like, it's $200 for the seat in the waiting room. Well, do we need the seat in the waiting room? I don't know. Vance can stand for 45 minutes. I don't actually want the seat in the waiting room. Why am I paying $200? And yet, here we are. So we will address that with the hospital later. For now, let's return to the hospital. Vance and I had to adjust our attitudes, go in and get excited to see our baby and find out the gender. And it's so funny because we discussed finding out the gender before or at the birth. And when we first got married, we wanted to find out when we had the baby. After 2 years of trying, Vance was a little antsy. So I'm flexible with these decisions. We are going to find out throughout the pregnancy. And then the next decision was, do we do a gender reveal party? I personally do not understand gender reveal parties. They fall in the category of engagement parties and TikTok dances, most fads that are around, except for a Walla Wada Bartles, which I love. The Stanley Cup, I don't really understand or have a use for. However, Vance likes these things, so he wanted to do a gender reveal. throughout our discussions, I did emphasize that if we are going to do a gender reveal, you need to know that your reaction will be the same, whichever gender it is. Which, after much contemplation, he came to the conclusion it would not be the same, and we should find out in the doctor's office. We're in the office and we go through, 40 minutes of looking at all of the different body parts and the organs, and it's such a miracle of life. And on the one hand, I'm very excited to see this. On the other hand, I'm still mildly annoyed about the cost of it, but I'm seeing my baby. So what is money at that point? The point is we're seeing our child. We get to the moment of truth. She asks if we want to find out what we're having. Are we sure? I look at Vance. You sure? You want it? We're having a girl. I laughed because I knew what Vance's reaction was going to be. And it was as expected. And I'm glad that we didn't have a gender reveal party. That said, he is so sweet, and he bought me flowers the next day, pink flowers, and got a little baby girl card. We picked out the name, and we are both so excited and thrilled to be having a little baby girl. I will reveal it the name at some point, but for now, I will keep it close to home. And to everyone else who asks, that I just tell. Since it was Father's Day this past weekend, this also led me to reflect on my own father. And there's definitely something special about the relationship between a father and a daughter. And the two things that I know I got from my father are, one, my competitiveness. Now, my dad never treated us differently because we were girls. I never thought I was different because I was a girl. I never looked at boys and thought, oh, they can do this and I cannot. That said, my dad also did not teach us things like handy tool tricks or how to change a tire of our car, because I don't believe that my dad knows how to do that. Nor does he want other people to know that he's capable of it, because as he said, if people know you're capable, they'll ask you to do favors. So we didn't get any handy skills from my dad, but he did treat us and me like the athletes that he coached, down to the fact that he constantly reminded us that we needed button thighs. And I think we all got button thighs. Definitely the girls got button thighs. And when he was at a tennis match, the one thing that he would always cheer was compete, Anna, compete. And that's something that I took and still carry with me to this day. No matter what I'm doing, I compete. The other thing that he gave me, which I think every father has a crucial role in giving to their daughters in particular, is confidence. Now, Vance would say he maybe gave me a little bit too much confidence, and often reminds me that when I talk, I sound so assured that I'm correct, which I frankly don't understand, because why would I say something if I thought I was wrong? Now, we have started using a percentage system so that I say how correct I think I am, because I do tend to speak with a lot of conviction. I get that conviction from my father. But more importantly, I carry myself with a confidence and a knowledge that I am loved, that I am valued, that I am worthy, because I had a father who instilled that in me constantly, because he told me how smart I was, how proud he was of me, how beautiful I was, how intelligent I was, how loved by God I am, and how worthy I am in the eyes of God because of what Christ did for me on the cross, not because of what I have done. And having a father lead our family and lead me in that way is just so critical to who I am. And I'm so grateful for the dads out there who are doing it for their daughters in particular, because I am a daughter. And I am excited to see Vance do that and instill those same values and that same confidence in our daughter. And I know he will, because he does it with me, because I am the most precious thing to him. And knowing how precious I am to my father, knowing that he would lay down his life for me, is such a beautiful picture of our Father in heaven. And it's such a unique calling that men have on their lives, to be that picture for their children, to be the picture of a father who lays down everything for his children. So thank you to all of the fathers out there who are doing that and who are working hard to do that, even in the moments when it is really hard. We appreciate you. Your children appreciate you. And now let's kick it over and we'll get our interview with Rachel. Hi there. Today we are welcoming Rachel Schnorr onto the podcast. And I have known Rachel for almost 15 years now, which is wild. She was my first manager at my first job at the Rim Kaufman Group in Charlottesville, a brand new city for me. And she was also a member of the first Bible study that I went to after college graduation. So that goes back a long ways. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about your story.
Yeah, I love that you're doing this. And I had forgotten some of those early details. I can't remember which came first. Did they both happen at the same time? Did the Bible anyway? Oh, that's such a long time ago. I remember the Bible study vividly, that the work stuff, maybe there's too much work stuff to keep in mind. I do remember
That's
some
true.
conversations around your desk. I do remember that.
Yeah, I laughed a lot. I remember that.
Yeah.
I got told I laughed a lot.
Yeah, you were a great source of joy in the office.
Okay, so let's start from the beginning. What was your expectation of having children when you were growing up?
Well, so I was, first I'll say I was homeschooled for my entire K through 12, which was, I think, provided, like that influenced my perspective on having children, because I spent a lot of time with my mom, I spent a lot of time like with, moms and children, like that's, obviously I had my studies, but in terms of when we got together with friends or play dates, or, we had a really great kind of homeschool co-op and support group. So I observed, moms staying home and children. So that's, who I was with. And so certainly that was that formed my early understanding of what families looked like. And, I grew up in Williamsburg, Virginia. So I wasn't in a big place like New York where you had a lot of career-minded women. And so, in the mid 80s and 90s, yes, women were starting to have the ability to be able to focus on careers more if they wanted, but that was just not what I observed until later in life. So yeah, I thought I would, have a couple kids, stay home. There were 3 of us girls in the house. And then I sometime in high school, I was like, oh, I kind of like using my brain in different ways. So like maybe part-time is a great solution. Maybe I'll do that. And then, I feel like, I don't know how far you want me to go, but then it was like,
Keep going.
Into college, and obviously, I needed to get a job to support myself out of college, and it was just sort of like over time as I got to learn and know myself, it was like, oh, like maybe, what is this going to look like for me? And still having those big questions of, can I work and be a mom still? What does that look like? So you might ask about this later, but anyway, yeah, I always assumed I would have kids, and so yeah, that was always a part, 2 probably.
Yeah, we can for sure get more into the career stuff later, because it's always interesting how you make those decisions with you and your husband, your partner. So when in your marriage did you start pursuing pregnancy, and did it happen quickly? Did it take some time?
Yeah, we were married like for about 7 years before we had our daughter, and I think for the longest time we just didn't really feel ready. I mean, we didn't get married right out of college, but it was a couple years out, so we were still relatively young and just, I don't know, just didn't feel ready. We enjoyed traveling a bit. I was enjoying my work, and so yeah, it was about 7 years in, and it did happen, I think, fairly quickly. We didn't know. At the time, I didn't know. Well, no, at the time had recently found out that I had celiac and autoimmune disease. So I was like, oh, this could impact, this might impact fertility. But yeah, we ended up, I think, a month or two. So yeah, it was thankfully, God, allowed us to allow that to happen without a lot of stress or waiting.
And you did say that during that first pregnancy, you had some complications. Could you walk us through those?
Yeah. So, I mean, everything was fine. I was, I was pretty active. Like I kept up kind of my exercise. It was like, oh, I have no aches and pains. This is great. Like pregnancy's not really that hard. Now, I will say I always had these like worry, I was definitely very worried of like something could go wrong at any moment. Like I didn't always fully enjoy the experience, but physically I felt fine. But yeah, around, 37 weeks, when you start getting into those final like checks at the doctors, they started noticing some things and it was like, oh, this is interesting. And so they did some extra ultrasounds and I'm sure I'm going to botch the name, but I mean, what it ended up is that I have almost two uteruses. So I have like almost a full, what's it called? Like split down the middle of my uterus, which means, septum, sorry. And it's got a name for it. I forget what it is. So, and interestingly, I, had a college friend who had two separate uteruses and that caused her to have a preterm birth, which thankfully, that her daughter was healthy and all that. But there were a couple people that I had just learned about this kind of rare situation. I was like, oh, that's kind of scary. So, at that point it was like, okay, let's monitor this. Like this probably increases the chance that you may not, you might need a C-section, which I was disappointed about, but trying to be prepared for. So it happened so late, thankfully, that it was like the baby was pretty much full term. I think had I known earlier, I would have been really worried because I know that condition can cause, late miscarriage or very early preterm birth. So it ended up that I did need to have a C-section because the baby they didn't believe the baby could be born naturally without, risk of major injury to me. And so that was a disappointment. But, after 24 hours of labor, you're like, fine, just get the baby out. So when I got pregnant about a year ago, or whenever that was, a year and a half, which was a total surprise. And frankly, a big part of the reason we hadn't had any other children, one, we just were enjoying our daughter. Our life felt busy. We were kind of content with what we had. But I was also very nervous about getting pregnant again, now knowing the full extent of my condition. And I had additional tests after. And I was just very worried about that. Like in my case, my first daughter was basically carried on one side of my uterus the whole time. So they were like, that's great. That side of your uterus had plenty of space. It proved itself, which is the term. But it's like, if it happens again, like, we don't know. What if the baby grows on the other side? What if that side doesn't operate the same way? So that was very nerve-wracking for me. So I feel like the whole time I was in even more of a worried state with the second pregnancy. Physically and exercise-wise, I was also in a different place. So I just, second pregnancies don't feel quite as good as the first. So I had some more concerns, and I felt like I was always worried that something major was going to go wrong. And because it's like the statistics say, 50% chance of miscarriage with this condition.
Wow.
But it's like, well, you kind of throw that out the window because your uterus proved itself. And thankfully, we did discover through ultrasounds that like the baby was in the same position. So that gave a little bit of comfort, but I didn't enjoy it. Mentally, I did not enjoy it. So
I'm sure. Is there anything that they can do for the split uterus or no?
Well, I mean, you could try to surgically correct it, but so TMI, you can have a septum in your uterus. It can also impact your cervix, which mine did as well. It can also impact your vaginal canal. So you can have kind of issues in all three of those areas or just one. If you have a septum in your vaginal canal, that can be fairly easily corrected with surgery. That's like not a major thing. but I think it becomes like, is it really worth the risk if you try to address something with your cervix or your uterus? So I think it depends. Definitely, it's just interesting that in all the years of pap smears, like no one ever, because for me,
picked it up.
So yeah, mine can be viewed externally. And so it's just interesting that no doctor ever found that. So it's supposedly a rare condition, but I think a lot of times these things just aren't known, and you wouldn't really know to look for it. Sometimes it can just be hard to detect. So yeah, I did, they were like, in between, the pregnancies, I was like, well, I don't think I'm going to have another baby. It's really not kind of worth getting this addressed. And then, and then God had other plans. So, yeah. But yeah, uterine didelphys, I think that's one of the terms. Anyway, you can Google this. There's a whole bunch of different, like, you can have a full split or partial, or there's a bunch of different names, but just looking up uterine abnormalities, you can probably find something on it.
Okay, so maybe TMI question, but I'm always interested when people say it was a surprise. Were you on birth control or like actively preventing it from happening the second time? And it just popped?
No, we were just kind of watching timing, and I had miscalculated something. Because like, yeah, there were other times. Well, I think momentarily we thought we might try for another. And so I was like, oh, there's other times this could have happened and it didn't. So like, I'm getting a little older. Maybe this, maybe my fertility's down.
The window's closed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then I went up to DC to visit my sister and drank a whole lot of alcohol that weekend. Great.
So the second pregnancy, obviously it was a surprise. And then also, were you transitioning jobs at that point?
Yeah. I was unemployed. I had been laid off, and I was in the midst of like 5 different pretty serious interviews, getting down the pipeline, and it was so early. It was like 6 weeks or something, that you haven't even had the heartbeat ultrasound. You get, Yeah. It's like this weird, like, so the particular employer that I'm now with, and I had started getting more serious and exploring. It was like, they're a really small business. This is like a big deal. Like, I'm kind of the main person in the U.S.
You're the person.
Together. And for me to go out, like, this also feels like a bait and switch. So anyway, I was like, no, I can't. I'm not going to do that. I can't tell them this early on. So it was scary. And the interesting thing is I was coming on also as contractor status. So I was a full-time employee, but because the company is incorporated outside of the U.S., it was just how they had to handle U.S. employees. So like, we didn't have any real benefits. There was the hope that we would, but anyway, we were trying to link up with another company to help provide, benefits. And so I was like trying to ask about the maternity leave benefits or general benefits without being obvious. It's like, I was on my insurance, but it's like, okay, well, what happens? How do I get time off? Is there a maternity policy? So I just had to kind of trust that it would work out. And, I told them, a few weeks in, like kind of once I reached the 13-week mark. And it was also like, all right, I had a few weeks to prove myself. Look, this was not a bait and switch. Like, I intend to come back. So they were very supportive. But yeah, I'm sure it was a big surprise.
How much time did you get off for your second?
3 months, which is what I had for the first. So, which is, it certainly would have been great to have more, but, like I was telling you earlier, I was, last time was pre-pandemic. I was full-time back in the office after 3 months. And so, being able to be remote this time, we don't have a physical presence, office presence. So that also helped and gave me a sense of like flexibility, and I could ease into this. And, I think working habits are just a little bit different than they were. So, the 3 months I was ready to come back, but those first few months back are really hard, balancing things, and, you're still feeding the baby a lot. And it kind of takes until 6 months, I would say, that you start to feel like, things are getting a little
in a rhythm. You're human again.
Yeah.
So So let's talk about the career for a second. And how have you and your husband navigated career? How have you thought about it? Obviously, you are still very actively engaged in your career and growing in it. So how have you balanced that?
Yeah, I mean, so as the more I've gotten to know myself, it's like, I feel like I really thrive when I'm working full time. I love the type of work I do. I'm the type of person who just will work really hard. I mean, I just have a lot of intrinsic motivation for that. Doesn't mean it's healthy. My husband is different. Like, my hobbies are doing work in the evenings. Like, whereas my husband will be reading, or like he'll do golf, or, and like I said, that's not necessarily healthy. It's just what it is. Um, but so yeah, I think I had even more clarity this time, that like, I think that's the best. That's when everyone gets the best version of me, when I'm able to do both of those things, and feel like I'm using my other skills and abilities. I will say, as my first daughter has gotten older, she's like 7.5 now. I mean, there's definitely times where, like, me having work to do, like, I prioritize work over family, and I I think I'm seeing some impacts of that I'm trying to make sure don't, like, damage her and I's relationship. So I would say, because of the way I handle things in particular, it does make me, like, unavailable at times, and I have seen that has been hard for her, and so she feels more connected to her dad in some ways. So that is something that, like, I regret, and I'm wanting to try to correct and be as present as I can. So, I mean, yes, it's a lot of work. I think different personalities handle things differently. So for me, like, I don't mind catching up in the evenings and doing extra things,
Yeah.
because I'm inspired and motivated by the work that I do, so that it matters to me. But yeah, it's definitely not without its sacrifices. I mean, there's plenty of sacrifices in the, like, exercise and nutrition area too. Or you have to be really disciplined and push through when you don't feel like doing that stuff. So yeah, it's hard, because I don't know. I'm also aware that I think a lot of moms who choose to stay home, or whether they felt like that was something they wanted to do, or they had to sacrifice their career to do it. I think there's also a lot of stigma against moms for doing that. I think in trying to, like, we've kind of overcorrected. So now,
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you must not, like, have it in you to be able to pursue work and be a mom. It's like, well, no, we need to respect that, like, everyone is wired differently, has different gifts, and, I mean, yeah. Being a working
It makes
mom
different trade-offs.
Trade-offs, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think that's a great perspective. Okay, I'm curious about this. So, as a mother, you get fed information from a lot of sources. I feel like even in the past 7 years, I was talking to someone yesterday about all of the Instagram ads and influencers for momhood now, which probably 7 years ago were not around. Maybe thankfully, maybe not. But like, how did you decide, things like to breastfeed or not to breastfeed, vaccination, organic, sleep trading, homeschooling,
Yeah.
schooling? How have you navigated this with your first child? And then did you learn any lessons and make a shift at all with your second?
Yeah, the first time, this time I noticed a whole lot more of just content that was being, like, pushed at me. Like, just on Instagram, I would see these reels, most of which were very funny. And I was like, it's capturing the experience of what it feels like to be a mom breastfeeding or whatever. There's also many useful, like, here's food ideas or activity ideas. And it's like, that stuff was never being, like, pushed at me. I had to, like, go find it on blogs or sign up for something. So, I don't know. I tend to, so yeah, I spent considerable effort, like, researching non-toxic products, like cribs, mattresses. Like, I think we wanted, everything that our first baby had to, like, be free of chemicals and that sort of thing. And I also learned there are certain certifications that are kind of BS. They don't really mean anything. It's like when your milk tells you it doesn't use growth hormones. It's like, okay, well, that's because those aren't legal. So throw that out. So yeah, so it was really nice to have all those decisions out of the way. Somehow we had kept all of our baby stuff. I'm not exactly sure why, but we had. So I didn't have to really make any of those decisions again. I also, with my first, I think based on the influences around me and, like I wanted to breastfeed and I did breastfeed her basically for the first year. Now she had some trouble latching. So like, I used a nipple shield and frankly, I wish yeah, so she kind of used that the whole time, which was really unfortunate because she was not a very flexible breastfeeder. So I ended up just pumping a lot, but she had breast milk basically through the first year of her life. Around 9 months, I started needing more supply. So, incorporating formula, which was hard for me to I felt like I wasn't, like as a mom, you're not like doing what you should. So that was kind of because my goal was to make it to a year. And so I felt a little bit like, failure when you had to start incorporating formula, although I realized many people have to incorporate formula right away. So I found there are some really good like German and Dutch, like European formulas that have even way higher standards than the US. So I spent a lot of time researching those. The names are like Holly and HIPAA. Anyway, you can look it up. But so so a lot of those decisions were already made. So with this one, I mean, I wanted to have a better breastfeeding experience. That was my goal with this one. And so with the help of a lactation consultant initially, but also I went back to see one around a month later. And that really helped because I think what I didn't realize last time is like, even if your baby has gotten used to eating in a certain way after a month, like that can change. They're getting stronger. No one ever told me that. So I could have had a much better experience with the first, but I kind of thought, oh, these patterns are set. And our second did have like a tongue tie. So she had to have that lasered off by a dentist. She had top and bottom tongue ties. So that we debated, like, would this help? It was unclear, but you could definitely see that the tongue was restricted. So that, that was definitely worth it and she also cried way louder after that because she had full range of motion with her tongue. So, so I would say we really saw the benefits of that after a few weeks. So, but this time around, maybe because the breastfeeding experience was more enjoyable, I did not have as much patience with the pump. I just found, I think too, because I was at home, like last time, I mean, I kind of religiously every 3 hours at work, I went to the mother's room and I don't know, I guess that was hard for sure. But this time pumping was even more inconvenient to find time. I felt like I was always running out of time and then a call would be starting. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to give up pumping. It was just becoming too much. And so I realized I had to give up the dream of having her exclusively on breast milk. And so around 5 months, I started incorporating formula and then I just gave up pumping probably around 5.5 or 6 months. And so I would feed her in the morning, evening, and overnight. And I was like, well, just see how long this lasts. So anyway, so I was done breastfeeding her at all, probably around 7 months. So that was a little sad because I was like, on one hand, you're like, okay, I'm ready to be done. I need to have my body.
Your time back, your body.
But, it's also emotional and sad to not be able to do that. So I felt like I was able to, this time around, I think because I was a little more settled in my life, more settled in my career, it's just too many things had to give and I had to figure out what to adjust. And so, I think part of me felt selfish that okay, I'm prioritizing career or some things for me over, maybe what's entirely best for my baby, but I had to consider all of the factors and my other daughter and just mental health and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So, and with vaccines too, that was a hard, that was a hard one. And we, also just a lot of research and thinking with our first daughter, and we wanted to be able to delay some a little bit, based on some experience I had with vaccines, as well as just, there's some possible linkages with vaccines and autoimmune and not knowing if she would have inherited any of that from me. So we chose a doctor who kind of takes a holistic view and helps you talk through the options and help you think through, if you want to delay vaccines a little bit, here are some things you can do in the meantime. anyway, so yeah, that's a very contentious subject more than anything else, and it's hard to talk about. But I think it's important for families to get in good information, certainly,
Yeah.
from doctors who are going to be able to see it from various perspectives. And so we're following the same doctor, and delaying some of the vaccines for our second daughter as well.
Yeah. It's helpful to have information on them and to have the option to delay as they grow, right?
Right.
Okay. So how has your faith played a part in pregnancy and motherhood, life?
Yeah. Well, I think, I think it doesn't always make things easier, but it does give you this sense of like, if something happens that doesn't go according to plan, like you have to sort of be able to trust that that's a part of, a bigger plan that you can't fully understand. And so on some level, there's a little bit of like comfort for that as like a background belief. I think certainly having the ability to like take your worries in prayer, although I don't do that nearly enough. I tend to just try to beast it out on my own. But I remember with my first daughter she was like probably a couple months old. I was running errands and on the way home, and she was like starting to scream in the back of the car. And I just remember having this feeling of like, I wish, she could know that I'm not going to not take care of her needs. But she can't understand that. And I had this like very vivid moment of like, oh, this is what God feels like with us. Like we don't trust or can't see, but like, he's not going to abandon us. He's going to take care of our needs. So that was a really interesting moment of experiencing that from a different perspective.
Yeah.
And, I think a big worry of mine is also just with life being busy, like how do we incorporate, spiritual practices for our children early enough to where, certainly, through church or, books or Sunday school, things like that. Like my daughter is learning about the Bible, but I certainly have this fear that we're not kind of modeling that enough at home in terms of how we prioritize spending time in the mornings or doing family devotions together. We just had a hard time making that happen. And, and just incorporating prayer like throughout the day, not just at meal times. Like I want her to kind of have this experience that it's integrated into every aspect of life, because that's how I think about it, but I don't always display that in my actions. And I do know some parents who I think do that really well. And so I don't know, that's a worry of mine and something that we should put into practice rather than start worrying, just keep worrying about it. So yeah, I don't lean into the power of prayer as much as I should, knowing that God orchestrated all of this and,
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say it feels like a little bit of a failure point for me.
My parents proclaim the same scriptures every morning, and they have for the past 25, probably 30 years, my whole life. And so that was something that was very cool to see growing up. Same scriptures. Yeah, awesome. I still have half of it memorized. If they started, I could go down, but I need someone to kick it off. Awesome. Well, thank you a lot for sharing. My closing questions. One, what are you most grateful for just in being a mother? And what is one piece of wisdom you'd leave with people listening?
I think most grateful for is just being able to experience children. I think you see how it's pretty amazing, just how, God designs little humans, how human life starts. And, they're funny. It's just it's very interesting to see the world through children's eyes. So I think just having the ability to have experienced children and have relationships with them is, I think that's such a gift for parents and for any other people who get to interact with children. So I would, that's what comes to mind. It's it's pretty amazing and teaches you a lot about people. And I think we overlook that a whole lot. We really underestimate like what children are capable of feeling and thinking and what they perceive just because they can't verbalize it in the same way. Piece of advice. Gosh, I mean, yeah, just that, I don't know, just whatever you see from other people, whether that's on social media, whether that's friends, like there's so much that you don't see about how they have to hold it all together. So like, there's just a whole lot beneath the iceberg. And so I think it just, everyone has to figure out their own way forward. Everyone's situation is a little bit different. Even if something looks easy, I'm sure it's not. Just, yeah, it looks to me deceiving. And I don't know, every family and mom and, everyone needs to figure out, I think, what works for them. And it's going to be a unique combination of things. So, I think that's also like, don't be too hard on yourself. There are so many things to do perfectly. But ultimately, if your child feels loved and you're able to prioritize, the time you need with them and make sure you're healthy so you can do that, I think those are the most important things. And, and obviously, the power of God to help get you through these moments. I think it's so easy to feel, I don't know why, it's easy to feel like, oh, God doesn't, I have to figure this out on my own today. But like, and assume that somehow God can't help you through that. So just leaning into that and trying to give your worries there, multiple times throughout the day.
Yeah.
It's kind of moment by moment.
I love that. Yeah. All right. Awesome note to end on. Rachel, thank you so much for joining. I super appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. This is great. I'm excited to see how this continues to come together.
Yep. All right. Bye. Thanks for listening. And if you like the show, please share and give us a 5-star rating. Unless you think it's mediocre, then give us 4. I'm not looking for pity ratings here. More than that, though, if you have a story you'd like to share, please reach out. You can find me on Instagram at The Womb Warmer. Until next time, cheers.